Hi everybody, Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, and today's contract tip has to do with a couple of seller hacks for a kickout clause. So what am I talking about? Well, there are a lot of buyers out there that must sell their current home before being able to close on the sale of a new home. So if you're representing a seller and they get an offer from a buyer and the buyer includes the sale or lease contingency exhibit, and the seller and buyer negotiate that exhibit and include the kickout clause, this is what I'm talking about. A couple of hacks for you sellers for the kickout clause. So let me tell you a little bit about the forms in and of themselves. So in the GAR, the Georgia Association of Realtors contract, the form is F604. I'm sorry, it's not F604. It is Form 601, Sale or Lease of Buyer's Property Contingency Exhibit. And you will see in that form that there is a kickout clause that the buyer and seller may negotiate through. In the RE Forms contract package, it is Form RE 251. That is the sale or lease contingency exhibit that also has a kickout clause. So what is a kickout clause? Well, generally speaking, what it means is the seller agrees to go under contract with this buyer, understanding that the buyer must sell their current home before being able to close on the transaction for the seller's home or the buyer's new home. So a lot of buyers and sellers will negotiate for a kickout. What does that mean? That means that the buyer allows the seller to continue to market the property as active to try and get in another buyer. If the seller does get another buyer with an offer that they want to accept, then they go back to buyer number one with whom they are under contract and say, okay, buyer number one, I have another buyer. I have buyer number two that I want to accept their contract. So we have a kickout clause. So you have the option of either removing the contingencies that we negotiated for in those exhibits, removing your contingencies. I'll stay in contract with you and we'll go to closing, or I'm going to kick you out. If you are not able to remove those contractual contingencies, then I'm going to kick you out, meaning we're going to terminate your contract. You will get your earnest money back, and the seller will go with buyer number two and close with buyer number two. So that's what a kickout is. It is an option for buyer number one to be kicked out of the contract if they are not able to remove whatever contingencies were negotiated for on that form. So that's in essence what we are talking about. Okay, so sellers, here are the few hacks that you need to pay attention to. Before you ever go back and kick out buyer number one, you best negotiate completely with buyer number two and get a complete binding backup contract. So what does that mean? That means you're under contract. You have a binding agreement with buyer number one. With buyer number two, you completely negotiate through the terms using counter offer, so forth and so on. And once you agree on the terms, then you are also going to include the backup contingency exhibit. And in the GAR forms, Georgia Association Realtors, that is Form F604, Backup Agreement Contingency Exhibit. And in the RE forms package, that is RE252, Backup Agreement Contingency Exhibit. So what does that mean and why should you do that? Well, this is hack number one. You want to get a binding backup and then go and exercise your kickout clause with buyer number one. That way, if buyer number one is not able to remove the contingencies and must terminate and get their earnest money back, then you immediately slide in and your backup contract with buyer number two now becomes primary. If you just get an interested offer from buyer number two and never negotiate a binding backup contract, and you exercise the kick out to buyer number one, Kickout is not able to remove the contingencies. They terminate. They get their earnest money back. Then you go and fully negotiate with buyer number 2. Well, if you can never negotiate a contract with buyer number 2, sellers, you are back at square one, back active on the market with 0 contracts. So that's hack number 1, is make sure that with buyer number 2, you completely negotiate a backup offer. Now, as I said, and it says it in the actual backup contingency exhibits, it says the buyer allows the seller to continue to market the property as active. Well, how do you do that? You cannot put it in your MLS system as active because you're not active. You have a binding contract. It's just that your binding contract with buyer number 1 has a kickout. So in the MLS services, you must list it as active under contract. That dictates, that communicates to all the other agents out there, and that is the status in FMLS and in Georgia MLS. If you're in another MLS system, they will have something similar. It'll say active with kickout or active with contingency or something like that. But this is active under contract. That does communicate to the other agents out there that you do have a contract, but typically speaking, there is a kickout clause involved, and buyer number 1 could be kicked out in favor of buyer number 2. So that is the way to continue to market. But a couple of other things that you can do. Well, you agents, you may continue to market the property as active on your social media, on your Facebook, your Twitter, your Instagram, your YouTube. Now, I caution you, I suggest that you definitely still indicate that there is an offer on there that does have a kickout, or else you are going to have to deal with a co-op agent with buyer number 2 who is not going to be pleased with you when they think that their buyer, that the property really is available. Because even if you negotiate completely with buyer number 2, if you go to buyer number 1 and exercise the kickout clause, and buyer number 1 says, yes, I want this house, I will remove all contingencies, I am staying in contract, then the seller stays in contract with buyer number 1 and takes it to closing, and buyer number 2 remains in backup position until either something happens or it closes. So again, that is an agent to agent. You cannot mislead the public or the other agent as to the true status of the property, but you may generate additional interest to be able to negotiate a backup contract for buyer number 2 for your seller. And in your MLS services, also, I strongly suggest that you take advantage of the reverse prospecting tool. There is a reverse prospecting tool in FMLS and Georgia MLS that you can go and reach out to other real estate agents who are already working with motivated, qualified buyers who are looking for that exact property that you have listed. If you would like me to do a video tip on that, please comment below. Thank you so much for your time. If you like that video, please check out this one here. If you like all of the videos or the content on this channel, please click here to subscribe. Once you are actually in the channel itself, you will see a wide variety of topics that I cover. Contracts, license law, ethics, lead generation, all kinds of things. You can check those out under the videos tab and the playlists tab. And as you will see, I try to make even the most complicated of real estate situations crystal clear. See what I did there? Crystal clear. Real estate made crystal clear. Thank you so much. I do appreciate your time. And my name is Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, satisfying your needs with service, innovation, and education.